Professor Sandel, thank you so much for agreeing for this interview. In your book, The Tyranny of Merit, could you tell me a little bit about how much time have you spent writing this book? What sort of got you thinking about this book? Of course, you've referred to a lot of contemporary events in the US. For instance, the election of Donald Trump. We've seen a very similar sort of rise of populist, nationalist sentiments around the world, in India included. And there is definitely a lot of anger that spills onto the streets. There's been a lot of violence as a result of that populist anger. There's been a lot of targeting of minorities. So I'm curious to know a little bit about what got you thinking along the lines of merit in particular.
What prompted me to begin thinking about this book were the events of 2016 and the rise of authoritarian populism generally around the world. But in 2016, we had the Brexit vote in Britain, the election of Donald Trump in the United States. And this seemed to be part of a broader populist backlash against elites, often connected to a kind of strident nationalism that we saw in a great many countries. And so I wanted to try to begin to make sense of it. And one way of making sense that some have offered is to say this is simply a rise in racism and xenophobia, ethnocentrism. Others say what explains the rise of populism is the fact that globalization has benefited those at the top, but has left many people behind and they're angry. I think there's a lot of truth in both of these standard explanations, but I think there is something more to it. And that's what I try to explain in my book, The Tyranny of Merit. Shall I try to explain why I think how merit comes into play?
Yes, please. That would be wonderful.
It's paradoxical in a way, because merit, generally, we think of merit as a good thing. If I need surgery, I want to find a well-qualified surgeon to perform it. So having well-qualified people in jobs and social roles, that's a good thing. So how can merit turn toxic? What does merit have to do with the deep partisan polarized divisions we see in our societies today and that feeds the populist backlash? I think in the following way. It's worth noticing, first of all, that much of what animates the populist backlash is resentment against elites. The feeling among many ordinary citizens that elites, especially well-credentialed, well-educated elites, are looking down on them. And I think there is something to this grievance that is worth taking seriously. In recent decades, the divide between winners and losers has been deepening, poisoning our politics, driving us apart. This has partly to do, this divide, with widening inequalities that we've seen over 4 decades of globalization. But it's not only the economic inequality. It's connected to changing attitudes towards success that have come with it. Those who've landed on top have come to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and by implication, that those left behind have no one to blame but themselves. Now this meritocratic hubris, as I call it, the tendency of the credentialed to look down on those less well-educated than themselves, it arises from a seemingly inspiring idea of meritocracy. This is the idea that if chances are equal, then the winners deserve their winnings. But there are 2 problems. First, we know chances are not equal. people don't have truly equal opportunity. But there's a further problem. Even if we made more progress in realizing the principles that meritocratic ideals promise, there would still be a problem. Meritocracy has a dark side because the more opportunity is truly equal, the more those who succeed believe they earned it by their own doing. And the more those who struggle are inclined to be demoralized, even humiliated, believing they've had every chance, they've not risen, it must be their fault.
So, it's very interesting to read this book from the context of India, because the question of merit actually has been one of the burning issues actually of the anti-caste movement. Do you feel that perhaps merit itself as an idea, is there anything that can salvage merit as an idea, right? Because in the book you talk about how, you wouldn't go to a dentist who's not particularly good, right? You wouldn't call a plumber, for instance, who's not particularly good, which I understand. But when it comes to, countries like India, where there are already so few opportunities, where you're trying to understand the backlash, you recognize the injustice of the backlash, but you're also recognizing the injustice of those who are, or at least the injustice that they feel that they're experiencing, right? So how then is merit enough of a category to understand what's going on in contexts like India, for instance, which is not perhaps as developed as a country like the United States?
In the debate about reservations, as I understand it, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that much of the opposition to reservations is in the name of merit. And the argument is that people should be admitted to universities, to jobs, strictly on the basis of merit, not on the basis of reservations. Reservations are seen as a constraint on merit, in opposition to it. Do I have that much right?
Absolutely, yes. Like anywhere else, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so there is that debate. And that debate involves competing ideas of merit and its moral significance. The idea that there is some naturally given notion of merit that is violated by reservations or a system of affirmative action presupposes that each person has an individual right to be considered for jobs and opportunities and places in universities solely on the basis of his or her academic scores, test grades, and so on. But is there such a right? I mean, this is how the argument would proceed as a matter of political philosophy and ethics. Is there such a right only if you believe that admission to university, say, or being hired for a certain job or position is a reward for superior merit and virtue, a matter of moral desert, something that the meritorious deserve? But that idea, I think, can be questioned, and I do question it. Let me use the example of LeBron James. He makes tens of millions of dollars a year. He's the greatest basketball player in the world. Now, he practices hard. He trains hard, of course. But I could train 24 hours a day for a lifetime, and I would never be as good a basketball player as LeBron James. He has athletic gifts and talents. So one question that can be asked Is it his doing that he has those great gifts as a basketball player? Or is it at least partly his good luck, his good fortune? That's one question. Beyond that, the fact that he lives in a society that loves basketball and rewards it lavishly with tens of millions of dollars, is that his doing? Or is that also his good luck? If LeBron James had lived in the days of the Renaissance in Italy, they weren't so excited about basketball. They cared more about fresco painters. So there are two elements of contingency, of luck and good fortune, in what we normally think of as merit. Merit, it's a kind of hubris for the successful to assume that their merits, whether athletic or academic and intellectual, or in regard to qualifications for a certain position, are their own doing, such that their success should be thought of as a reward for their superior merit and excellence and virtue. Once we notice the role of luck in life, even in a fair meritocracy, even putting aside corruption and nepotism, even in a perfectly fair system, even if opportunities could be made truly equal, still there would be these morally arbitrary contingencies accounting for who succeeds and who struggles, who lands on top and who's left behind. And if that's true, merit is not the measure of the virtue or the moral desert of the successful. And if that's true, then we have to have a broader public debate about how to share the benefits that nature and luck and fortune and circumstance have bestowed on some of us in greater measure than on others. And that's a debate about the common good. That's a debate about what makes for a just society.
We see that also playing out here, where those who seek reservation are automatically considered. There is the backlash is that they are not only are they not meritorious, but they are also somewhat morally inferior, and that in turn itself is, the legacy of caste. That's the legacy of caste. So I think it dovetails very neatly. But I do want to ask you. I do want to ask you about, the pandemic, right? And you start the book by talking about how, there is this notion of solidarity. There is this sense that we are in it together, but actually there's just so much inequality, and the way that we're experiencing the pandemic is so different based on our own class and caste positions, etc., gender, etc., that actually there's very little solidarity in the experience. I'm also wondering if you could please also address that. And I'm also wondering, to your previous point about recognizing perhaps fortune or fate, or something other than us, right? As a reason for why we do what we do. I'm also wondering whether the pandemic in some ways has also brought that out, making us alive to the unpredictability of fate and fortune, and also perhaps, the hollowness of our claim that, we deserve this or we don't deserve this, right? Yeah.
Right. Well, you've made two very interesting points about the effect of the pandemic on our way of thinking about ourselves and our place and our success. First, in terms of who contributes what to society. This now has been called into question. But let me say first, it's easy to assume that the pandemic has created vast inequalities because we experienced the pandemic in such different ways. But actually, what a great crisis like the pandemic does is not only to create inequalities, it reveals us to ourselves. It gives us a vivid picture of the way we are already as a society. In our case, deeply divided and highly unequal. In the early days of the pandemic, we often heard the phrase, the slogan, the comforting slogan, "We are all in this together." Now, to a certain extent, it's true. This slogan pointed to the sense in which we are all vulnerable, whatever our caste or our gender or our class or our ethnicity. We are all vulnerable to the virus. And in that sense of shared vulnerability, it's true, strictly speaking, that we are all in this together. But in practice, we know that we're not. The slogan, when we heard it from politicians and celebrities and advertisers also used that slogan. It rang hollow because we know that we are not all facing the same risk to our health and to our lives. Those of us with the luxury of working from home during the pandemic and holding meetings on Zoom can't help but recognize how deeply we depend on workers we often overlook. I'm thinking not only of doctors and nurses in hospitals who are caring for COVID patients. I'm thinking of delivery workers, warehouse workers, grocery store clerks, truckers, drivers, home health care providers. These are not the best paid or the most honored workers in our society. And yet now, during the pandemic, we are calling them essential workers or key workers because we recognize how important are the contributions they make to our ability to carry on during the pandemic, even as they face risks far greater than those who are able to work from home. So this could be a moment, though it highlights the inequality, the recognition of the importance of the work being done by workers who are often poorly paid could be a time for a broader public debate about how to bring their pay and their recognition, their honor, into better alignment with the importance of the work they do. Work, we often think of work in terms of pay, in terms of economics, and that's important. But one of the reasons pay is important is not only as the way that we sustain ourselves, but it is also a register of esteem. The economy of esteem matters as much as the economy of pay. And what I argue for in the book, people might follow along with the diagnosis and say, well, I see the dark side of meritocracy, but what is the alternative? Is the alternative simply to embrace hierarchies of caste given by birth rather than merit? I mean, that's one familiar question or line of objection. What is the alternative? The alternative, as I see it, to the tyranny of merit, to an excessive emphasis on individualistic conceptions of merit, is a broader politics of the common good that begins with the question, what would it mean to affirm the dignity of work? How would we have to reconfigure the economy of pay, but also the economy of esteem, of honor, of recognition, truly to accord dignity to work, which would mean expressing appreciation in the design of our economy and social life for the contributions that everyone makes, even those who today receive relatively little pay and little esteem. Here's an example of the sentiment that I have in mind. Shortly before he was assassinated, Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 visited some striking sanitation workers, garbage collectors, in Memphis, Tennessee. And what he said to them was this. He said, in the final analysis, the person who picks up your garbage is as significant, as important as a physician. Because if he doesn't do his job, diseases are rampant. All labor has dignity. That was his message to these striking sanitation workers, garbage collectors. And what's powerful about that way of understanding and articulating the dignity of labor is that it emphasizes contribution. The dignity consists in contributing something of value, of importance to the community as a whole and being appreciated for it. And this is why I think you've made a very good observation about the way in which the pandemic reminds us of the importance of this recognition. Because when we appreciate essential workers, when we clap for them, as in some countries, people gather in the evening and applaud, clap for essential workers. When we put out signs thanking them, we are recognizing this element, what I call the economy of esteem, of respect, of dignity, and it's about contribution. Too often in recent decades, we've conceived the economy as a system of consumption, providing the goods that people want to consume at the lowest possible price. But what this forgets is our role as producers. And it's in our role as producers, more than in our role as consumers, that we contribute to the common good and receive recognition and honor and respect for doing so.